now. And let's see where we are. Okay, we are live. All right, we are on part 4 of The Agony of Eros by Byung-Chul Han. And Jeff, I'll let you start by giving us a quick recap of what we learned so far, and then we can get going on this final chapter.
Okay. So in his very short book, The Agony of Eros, Byung-Chul Han is looking at the threats to love in the modern world. He sees a pretty unique combination of things that are happening that make it almost impossible to experience love in any sense of a more traditional, not romantic, but in a real sense of what love is. And for him, if you were to boil it all down, the notion of the disappearance of the other is what's at the heart of the threats to love in the modern world. And this manifests itself in many different ways. What he means by the disappearance of the other is that we are being trained, in a sense, society is moving us in a direction where we become narcissistic. We're looking for ourselves in somebody else, in whatever this other person might be. And when we do that, we're destroying their uniqueness, their otherness. And that, for him, is the central problem in the modern world. Now, it can be done in any time period, but today there are a lot more forces forcing us in that direction. And part of the reason is that love is, as funny as it may sound, love is probably the most powerful social force in the world. And the reason that it's powerful is because the difference between somebody in love and somebody out of love or not in love is that they are so much more willing to do pretty much anything that they can imagine. Love has the ability to destroy the barriers in the mind to thinking about new things or considering acting on different ways of living. And so this is dangerous for society, because if you're, say, in love with somebody that society does not approve of, and you're willing to get rid of or change your jobs, your lifestyle, your family, and everything for that love, that's a pretty powerful force. And many people can do that and do that. So society has a vested interest in destroying love and replacing it with something else, sexuality or pornography. And that's what he's looking at here and how it's being done in our society. So in the first session, we described a lot of the concepts that he was going through. One of them was the narcissification of the individual. We are all being brought to the same things. It's easier from a capitalist perspective to supply the needs of people who want the same thing. But in so doing, we have to destroy the otherness of other people and make them all one. And if we can do that, so much the better for productivity. But he also wants to talk about how others can't be known. The thought that you can know somebody, I mean, you can know things about them, but if you think that you ever know somebody, you're totally out to lunch. You can't. That's the nature of the other. They are incomprehensible. And so he labels this the atopic other. And if you lose the atopic other, you're essentially destroying the other person. And this is a power relation. When you start to fantasize and think of somebody as something that they are not, or that you wish them to be, you are putting a power relation on them and destroying their otherness. So that's one of the things he talks about. Also, just to be clear, we're talking about when we say love or eros, he's talking about the feelings that one gets in the body with regards to things they care about. Usually it's a significant other, and that's in fact the highest level, because that's the one that actually changes the physiology of the body the most, including the mind or the brain, because somebody in love, again, will do things, or is willing to do things that they wouldn't consider outside of and that for him is true love. If you claim to love somebody but are unwilling to do or make any changes for that person, that's not love. But that is what the world would like you to think it is.
So could we
say that's a brief summary of the first.
Could we say cult followers and in particular Trumpists use their love to do the crazy wild things that don't make any sense for their leader, or can a leader be an object of love?
Yes, but that is yes, in one sense, but not in the sense that Byung-Chul Han is talking about. You can feel a certain your body can change as a result of being in love with your leader, just as you can say on The Price is Right, winning a particular trophy or bedroom suite or something, or when you're at a sports game and you're cheering loudly for your team. That is a type of love for him because it has physiological characteristics of it, but it's unlikely that in a sports game or a TV show or in the love of a leader or a cult maybe a little bit more. So, but that you're willing to overcome the barriers that were formerly in your mind with new ones. Now, insofar as you can, yes, that's love. But what he's also talking about is with your most significant other. And if you have the same significant other as everybody else in your cult, it's probably pretty one-sided and not ideal from his perspective.
Fair.
But physiologically, it may be very similar, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So moving on to today's. The last thing I wanted to say. So in the first session, we were looking at it from we were setting up concepts, but also looking at it from an individual's perspective. The last two times we were looking at it sort of from a cultural or sociological perspective. One cultural, one sociological. They're very similar. Today, we're going to look at it more from a philosophical perspective and its consequences in related fields, as we see how love is important for knowledge, for thinking, for fantasy, for wanting and desires. All right, so continuing forward with some more facets of modern life that prevent the emergence of the other. So again, remember, if you can prevent the emergence of the other or the conscious recognition that there is another person out there, you've essentially destroyed love. So there are ways to do it by destroying the other or by preventing you from seeing it. So Han first introduces us to the notion that fantasy and desire are detrimentally affected by increases in information. Okay.
Right. Takes
So
the mystery away.
This is a yes. So too much information is that's almost a meme these days. But the idea is a little bit okay. Well, let's see where he goes with it. Today, okay, here's a quote from him. Today's computerized high-definition imagery eliminates vagueness and ambiguity. Okay? Yet fantasy inhabits a space that is undefined. Information and fantasy for him are opposing forces. If you don't leave something to the imagination, in other words, you have too much information, there's something missing there. It becomes almost commodified, which is one of the things we talked about last time, because then you can actually buy and sell that. Okay? Information and fantasy are opposing forces. The construction of the other does not depend on whether more or less information is available. Only the negativity of withdrawal brings forth the other in its atopic otherness. So when you're putting in information about somebody or the love interest, love object, you are in fact doing nothing. You're giving what's there, and what you're not able to do at that point is be open to the otherness. You're collecting information in a sort of piecemeal way. That's where if you recall the second chapter, being able not to be able, that's what you need to do. But constantly being active is unproductive. I mean, there's a certain amount of activeness, but what he's saying is that we've gone far too far in that direction in our modern society, where everything is about performance. This is something we talked about briefly last time, I believe. The idea that you are, when in love, feeling extremely strong, but simultaneously very weak. You are very malleable in your strength. And that's a good thing, because again, you're able to change. But if you're in an active sense, always looking for more information, more of this and that, you're losing the otherness of the other, because it requires a certain contemplation. It requires just being there in a sense.
So what kind of information
And that's where the withdrawal.
what kind of information is it that that one would be searching for, looking for? Like, what is he talking about exactly?
So again, we're going back to the same one we talked about last time. You kiss with your eyes open.
Yeah.
There's information there that your eyes don't need to see.
Okay. Okay.
Withdraw from that. So his suggestion is essentially to be able to withdraw from getting too much information. And this allows the atopic other in their otherness to emerge, because you're not, in a sense, looking for something, you're just merely experiencing it. That's important for him. So information as such is positivity, and we do need it, but again, we've gone too far in that direction. This leads to a dismantling of the other. When you take information, you're taking bits and pieces of the other. You're analyzing. Analyzing means to break things apart. But the other cannot be broken apart and remain whole. I mean, in a certain sense, you have to do that. But what he's saying is our society is severely imbalanced in the direction of analysis as opposed to synthesis. So too much information is bad for the imagination. And so he says, this is his quote, pornography, which maximizes visual information, is, as it were, it destroys erotic fantasy. And fantasy is a good thing. It's what's actually missing in our society. Or not missing, I should say. It's almost dead in our society. And he's not talking about the idea of cosplay or what you see in pornography or anything like that, which is fantasy in a different light. It's the commodification of images, of too much information. And that's what he's fighting about. I mean, information is good, but we've moved far too far in the direction of too much information. So, as an example, for more information often leads to more choice considerations. For example, seeking more information about a potential online purchase opens up more and more choices and variations from your first imagined need. And here's a quote from him. Unchecked freedom of choice is threatened to bring about the end of desire. And what he wants to say is that desire is always desire for the other, not for yourself. That's the interesting thing. It's for the other. The negativity of privation and the absence nourishes desire. As an example, when you're thwarted in your attempts to get something, you're often faced with a choice. Do you really want it? In which case you ask yourself, should I give it up or should I pursue it further? It's in that first thwarting, that first failure, that first inability to get what you want, that is the birth of desire. But capitalism, neoliberalism, the modern world wants to give you everything you want. And in so doing, destroys the other, and it destroys desire. Does that make sense yet?
I think
I'm going to get into that a little deeper in a minute. Okay. So as the object of desire, the other escapes the positivity of choice. So today's ego, with its endless capacity to enunciate and refine criteria in mate selection, such as in online dating, does not desire, it merely wants. So to be sure, consumer culture is constantly producing new wants and needs by means of media images and narratives, but desire is something different from both wanting and needing. So here he's coming into Lacan. Jacques Lacan was a famous psychoanalyst and philosopher in the 50s and 60s. And he has this schema of wants, desire, needs, wants, and desires. So for Lacan and for Hahn in this case, a need is like oxygen and water. You really literally cannot live without it. Okay, so we have certain needs. Nobody needs a car. Okay, nobody needs a computer. A need is something you literally will die if you don't have. Okay. A want, according to Lacan, and Hahn agrees with them, a want is always for the no thing. It is the limit of what can be had. So you can imagine a little child asking for a cookie, then a banana, then an iPhone or something like that. They're not really searching for these objects as such. What they're asking is the limit of their parents' ability or willingness to say yes. They're looking for that no. So finally, how far can they push their parents? This is what we all do at every stage of life. How much can I get? How much can I get before I hit that resistance? And when you hit that resistance, you've set there's a boundary there. At that point, you've achieved, or you've been thwarted in a sense. You've learned that this is the limit that this person is going to help you or get what you want. Usually, in the child case, it's in the direction of the parents. What are they willing to do for you? But once you've got that first thwarting of your wants, that's when desire can come alive, right? So in romantic life, consider that when one plays the social strategy known as hard to get, one is arousing desire.
Right.
And it's
that's why
quite
it works.
fun, actually. That's probably why it works.
Well, partially why it works.
But the no thing, yes, it's a fine lane. You don't want to go as far as impossible to get, because that's the no thing. That's like where you're absolutely no, because impossible to think kills the want. And in a sense, unless the person becomes obsessive, they kills the desire too. So in that sense, desire, the true desire is you thwart it, again, the not being able to be able, and it makes the heart grow fonder in a sense. And that's where the phrase in a sense comes from, absence makes the heart grow fonder. This illustrates the growth of desire, and it always comes from a failure to achieve what you want. So what he's claiming at, for example, is that constant connectedness on Facebook, for example, or Messenger hampers desire and turns love into a want. Wants are trophies to be displayed, and as such are obscene when they are people, because people should never be thought of as ends in themselves. Oh, one other thing we talked about last time that's important here is life is a means to an end. It's a means to love, because a life without love is not a life at all. This is part of the point where he points out that if you're starting to use people as means to ends of your own, you've perverted love. And that's a lot of what the world is like today. And that is something that we definitely need to be fighting against if we want to preserve love. They are an end in themselves, and as such, need to be respected in that respect. So, getting back to what Lacan was saying, the desire is born out of a failure, and the more you fail to a point, the greater desire grows. But our capitalist system is trying to satisfy every one of your needs as quickly as possible. And so,
but it's also getting in the way of us. It's also making us fail at all kinds of things in our goals for life.
Yes, but this book is more about the threats to love. So yes, I no doubt about that. What it is doing though is selling us something that's love, that's not love, as if it were love, and then we feel disappointed and we wonder why. Mm-hmm. Okay. One other thing that we touched on earlier is the notion of negativity and positivity. So our world, negativity and positivity are necessary for our world, for any life. But what he's saying is that our world is, again, heavily imbalanced in the direction of positivity. We are engineering out negativity at every step of the way as much as possible, and it's destroying the value and the meaningfulness of life. So he agrees with Nietzsche when he says that you live in interesting times. The idea is that it's the difference between the amplitudes of positivity and negativity that make a moment memorable. You need to have both, otherwise you're what Nietzsche would call the last man. You're just a flat couch potato kind of thing that has no ups or downs.
Hold on. To make a moment memorable, it needs both the up and down?
Well, the difference in amplitude between the positivity and the negativity, right? So if our world is eliminating all negativity,
right,
and the amplitude is only half as much as it is, right? So if you can't feel sad, it's hard to feel happy. And what you call happy becomes less valuable because you've never compared it to anything very sad.
So, okay, hold on. So, I mean, I agree that capitalism or in modernity creates a world where it's like being sad is frowned upon, and that everyone has to go around acting like they're happy, and everyone kind
That's
of
the
acts out.
over
Sorry.
that's the overemphasis of happiness,
Yeah.
right?
So yeah. Happiness is way overemphasized, but at the same time, the material conditions of capitalism are working to do the exact opposite and make us miserable and depressed and anxious.
So yes and no. So yes, they're making us depressed and anxious, but it's not because of the material conditions of capitalism. That is more the nature of increasing production within capitalism, because we have more than we've ever had before, and yet we are not happy because the stuff that we are producing is not actually desired as much as it is wanted.
Right,
And
but
wants and
but
desire are two different things.
in order to do that, capitalism has to alienate us from ourselves, our labor, the
Yeah.
product of our labor, our species being, etc. Our
Yes.
community.
So the alienation of to ourselves is what he's talking about when we are being forced by the society to become all the same, cookie cutter versions of it. The destruction of the other. So that destruction of the other is happening to us as we are doing it to other people, other significant others. And he suggests we need to be aware of this. I mean, it's okay if the person is not a significant other in a certain sense. You don't want to have a really intimate relationship with, say, your server, your coffee maker, or your checkout person. But but when you apply those relationships to the same in the same way to your significant other, that's when you're destroying them and the possibility of the deepest kind of affection and meaningfulness in your life. Because a bad look from your significant other can drive a person to like despair almost. A similar look from somebody who's not important to you, so what? Who cares, right? But the point, in order to have that up and down, you actually have to have meaningful relationships with it. If you don't care what your significant other thinks, they're not really that significant for you. But if they can change your mentality with just a look, both positive or negative, there's a significant other. But our world is asking us to be as calm as possible, or to always be happy. Like if your significant other gives you a bad look and you still happy, that's kind of the ideal that's presented to us, and that is very bad, because when your significant other is giving you a bad look, that's something that you should probably look into, as opposed to continue trying to be happy.
Now, Han is he German?
He's Korean, but teaching in Germany.
Okay. Now, so can we really say that this is true of everywhere in the modern world and in all of capitalism? Like, is this overemphasis on happiness the same in South Korea as it is in China or Australia or the Philippines or Nicaragua? Well, Nicaragua is technically socialist, so maybe that's a bad example. But is this
I
a
think
universal?
I think it is I think he would say that it is more universal the longer you stay in a capitalist system.
Okay, so the more
Uh,
advanced, the more farther along you are, the more this becomes part of the reality.
a problem.
Okay.
Yes, the positivity becomes the overwhelming desire, and what he's saying is that negativity is absolutely important. If you can't be worried about things, if you can't feel sad or hatred or anger, even the negative emotions, envy, jealousy, and all that kind of stuff, um, you're probably missing out on a great swath of human experience. And that human experience is part of what makes us human. So to try and push it away is a poverty of experience, even within wealth. So we in the first world may have the greatest amount of wants satisfied, wants in his sense of the word, things that we're looking for the maximum amount of the no thing. And so in theory, we should have the most desire also, but it doesn't work that way, because we're stuck in a world where we can't, or it's somehow bad form. It's almost taboo to say, I'm angry, or I'm hurt, or that kind of stuff. I mean, we do say it, but it's like, oh, what's wrong with you? Like, pull up your, suck it up kind of stuff is what we're sort of almost expected to do. Get to work, get back to producing things. And we yell at our kids when we see them fighting, but fighting is part of the world, and there's different ways to fight. We can fight in arguments and stuff like that. That negativity is being engineered out. It's being tabooed out. It's being labeled as bad form because you're not happy. What's wrong with you? Kind of stuff. Um, that's what he sees as part of the forces that are fighting against love. And the important thing here for him is that if you don't have that amplitude, when your significant other sends a signal, you're unwilling or unable to understand what it means, right? And being totally human in a sense requires the full range of human emotions. But if we're always trying to be happy or positive, that's the problem. And society sort of needs that if you want to get the maximum effort out of workers.
Right.
Which is why it's worse today than it has ever been in the history of the world, from his perspective.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So shutting your eyes is negativity. This is part of the KISS thing we were talking about earlier. And it does not pair well with positivity and hyperactivity and the hyperactivity of contemporary acceleration society. So one of the things he had talked about was how everything seems to be moving faster and faster in our society. And this is not by accident. This is almost necessary in order to keep people not satisfied, I should say, hungry for what they can't get, but they are promised in society. So if getting more and more of your wants satisfied is what you think you want, but really you're searching for that no thing, providing more and more makes you feel like maybe you're making progress. But what he's saying is that in fact is taking you away. You want to hit that no thing as soon as possible. Well, maybe not as soon as possible, but you want to hit it relatively quickly so that you can turn it into a desire, because it's desire that's important, especially for love. Merely wanting something, that's not. It's desire, and that comes from withdrawal or from the negativity that is being engineered out. And so here's where actually, like I've mentioned that the example of the kiss, he actually mentions it near the end of the book here. So closing your eyes is a visible, closing your eyes visibly signifies as much. So you close your eyes, you're like blocking something out in order to concentrate on something else. And the same is pretty much the same. So if your significant other makes a comment that is puzzling, suddenly everything else is blocked out, because that negativity there is the most important thing in that relationship at that moment. If you expect to trust somebody, if that's the opportunity to build the trust, right? If you decide not to engage at that moment, you are in fact losing the opportunity for trust, right? Another way to look at it is the constant distraction of things around you. The more there are beeping things in the background or data coming in, the more distracted you are, the more connected in a sense you are, the more you're actually missing out on the most important things in the relationship. If you have a constant set of distractions at all times,
like if you're on your phone,
yes, and driving, or not driving, but instead of actually talking with a significant other when they're making a major revelation or something like that, or experiencing something, then you're missing out on that, and you're sort of in a sense losing an opportunity to build trust and a deeper relationship. And that he sees as the most a big prevalence in our society. And you see people out on dates and they're both on their phones doing something instead of talking to each other. There's something wrong there from his perspective, and it's killing love.
Oh yeah.
Or the possibility of love in that case. So closing your eyes signifies as much. So perception can arrive at a conclusion only by way of peaceful contemplation. This is interesting. You're not going to be by rushing. Rushing doesn't help. And acceleration society, which is like we're moving faster and faster towards in a circle of nothing, and the inferno of the same, which he mentions in the first time, where everything is the same but just a slightly bit different. That you don't get that with constant activity. You need a calm. You need to linger. You need a peaceful contemplation. And that's where it comes with a kiss. If you keep your eyes open and you're concentrating on the other person with open eyes, you're not lingering. You're searching for information. Here, we're going to talk about that in a moment. But what you should be doing is contemplating it, closing your eyes to it. Okay. So he goes on to say that there's a certain peaceful contemplation that would be destroyed if one opened one's eyes and started staring at one's lover, because that's what you're sort of doing in the moment of an intimate embrace. And
I've
he
been
goes on
guilty
to
of this
say,
before.
yes, I know you confess to that. I
Yeah.
hope you never do it again. So it is impossible to achieve desire, that is the peaceful contemplation of the other, while receiving too much information, such as while watching television or one's newsfeed. So if you're watching television and trying to have a conversation with your significant other, you're divided. It's not really working. But it might be a really good show. All right. You got to decide which one's better. So cutting off access to information is negativity. And this negativity actually enhances desire and fantasy. And that's what he's talking about here. We live in a world of over-positivity, but we need more negativity in it. And it doesn't necessarily mean bad things. That's the interesting thing.
More negativity.
More negativity, yes, but not necessarily, more death and destruction.
Oh.
Okay. Any questions on that?
No, I think that's pretty clear.
Okay. So next, so in the last two chapters of the book, Han takes on a common ancient Greek Platonic image that is that our civilization has inherited. Imagine this: it's a charioteer whose name is Logos, and Logos is the Greek word for intellect or reason, thinking, and it's driving two horses. One is called Eros, or erotic love, and the other one is Thumos, which is spiritedness or courage. The idea is that together, Logos, Thumos, and Eros make up the Greek psyche, but by implication, it is that the intellect should direct our erotic love and our spiritedness. And so this is a Platonic. It's about as old as civilization, as Western civilization is. But for Han, who remember came out of a civilization that wasn't Western, for Han, this is seriously bad, because this cultural inheritance today is in fact killing Eros. And again, from Han's perspective, Eros is what makes life worth living. So if you're killing Eros, you're killing the value in your life, because again, life is a means to an end, not an end in itself. It's a means to love. And if you can't love, then your life is both meaningless and wasted.
What's the point?
Yes. So Han argues that Eros should be the driver of our Thumos and our Logos. So it should be love that drives our spiritedness, our courage, our thinking, our intellect, and our reason. And that world, in his mind, would be a much better world than the one we've inherited today.
Sounds like we need to get socialism so we can do that.
He doesn't go that far.
I know.
But here we're getting into the political aspect of it. Here's a quote from him. Eros makes Thumos bring forth beautiful deeds. Thumos then would be where Eros and politics touch. However, he says, contemporary politics, which lacks not only Thumos but Eros as well, has degraded into mere work. Okay, so he wants to distinguish work from, say, labor. A labor of love, for example. It's easier to say that than a work of love, right? It's not quite the same. When something is work, it's from his perspective, it's more like toil. It's negative in the bad sense of the term. So neoliberalism, he says, is depoliticizing society in general, and not least of all by replacing Eros with sexuality and pornography. So we had talked about this briefly earlier. When you put something up on display, you're essentially commodifying it, making it consumable, and in that there's an obsceneness when you're talking about things that are sacred. He talks about the profanation, or making profane things that are supposed to be set apart for special considerations, such as your significant other, who is supposedly the most special person in your life, the most set apart person, and the person whom you are most willing to change for. That's what modern world is doing with sexuality and pornography. It is neoliberalism, which is based on the Greek word epithumia, which is fleshly desire or lust. So in our burnout society, isolated, self-alienated achievement subjects. So this is okay. This links back to another book that he's read called The Burnout Society. The idea is that people are burning themselves up through excessive positivity. That's the essential thing. So everybody's working really hard to keep up with the Joneses or whatever else they seem to be thinking, and they're eliminating really what's important in life in order to get more wants. And wants here being different from desires. Desires, what you really want, is what is really desired as opposed to what's really wanted. So in a burnout society of self-isolated, self-alienated, again, remember in the first session, we talked about how in our modern world, freedom has become synonymous with compulsion, because we've moved from a world of thou shalt, which is where everybody's telling you what to do, to I can, where you tell yourself, you exploit yourself, you force yourself to do things you wouldn't normally want to do or do on your own for the sake of glory or money or prestige or anything like that. That turns our freedom into our source of compulsion. And because we do it to ourselves, we don't recognize it as such. This is where he talks about self-alienated, because we alienate ourselves from our own work. Achievement subjects, again, we're interested in achievement. This is something we talked about last time. And we measure our worth based on our achievements. And in a sense, we do this at every level. So in a burnout society of isolated, self-alienated achievement subjects, thumos is also withering away, thumos being our spiritedness, our courage. Communal action, that is a we, now proves impossible. Why? Partly because we're in competition with everybody else, in an artificially generated competition. Political action is mutual desire for another way of living. And now that other way of living is almost always prescribed for us, except on the fringe. And insofar as it's prescribed for us, it's not really another way of living. It is what we have now with just different wants. And that's the trick. Instead of letting us change our desires, what they do is they keep feeding us our wants. And insofar as we feed them our wants, they've got us. Like, we need to get the latest iPhone. We need to get the latest computer. We need to get the latest anything, the latest upgrade, the newest car. Very helpful for capitalism and for the production, material production. But what it's doing is destroying our desire and keeping our wants. We're never actually graduating out of our wanting, and we're still looking for that no thing. Like, how far is the limit of our society able to provide for us? Well, it's taking away our love, and we're not even realizing. It's taking away the things that make life worth living and leaving us with only wants.
See, to me, this seems like a necessary condition of capitalism.
I don't know if you would say it's necessary, but I wouldn't oppose it at this point.
I mean, because there's always been, marketing, and so it's just been a process of evolution over the past, 100, 200 years.
Yes. Oh, in that sense, that there's always been
in the creation of consumerist culture is a slow build as well. But it's like, in order for capitalism to keep going, it has to make more profits year over year, and eventually you're going to have to get to a point. You have to get to a point where you create these desires or the wants or whatever in people themselves, instead of selling them things based on logical need or whatever.
Yes.
Or use value. Yeah.
Well, that use value, he doesn't get into that. So again, from a love perspective, what you want is desire, because it's that desire, having failed once, having achieved a certain negativity that a want never gives you, it becomes much more valuable, right? Having failed to get your love interest the first time, having gone through a period of hard to get, makes that love interest so much more valuable.
Makes sense.
So the same is true for political action. It is mutual desire for another way of living, a more just world aligned with Eros on every register. Eros represents a source of energy for political revolt and engagement. And that is dangerous for society, which is part of the reason that society wants to get rid of it or tame it or, make people forget it. Recall also that an encounter with the other has a destabilizing and dehabitualizing and de-narcissifying quality to it. In the first chapter, he was talking about the Romeo and Juliet moment when you like love at first sight. And he doesn't say it always has to happen this way. You might grow into it or whatever, but at the moment that Romeo and Juliet looked into each other's eyes or looked at each other, and despite the fact that their families and their societies were warring and had, they were willing to change all that. I mean, these families could continue warring or they could bring them together. They were willing to die. That is dangerous for society, but that is in fact what he calls true love. And the same can happen at the political level. If you are unwilling to actually die for your beliefs or for your desires in the political realm, then it's just a lifestyle choice. And it's not very serious, and it's actually quite easy to say no to by a simple distraction with another want. And that's why it's very dangerous for society to have too much Eros in it, because it will actually ferment a real revolution. And I'm not talking like a revolution that's half-baked. I'm talking a real revolution that, you can actually imagine a different world and you have the energy to go and get it. And you're willing to overcome the mental barriers that you would never have come up before. That's what Eros does, even at the political level. So without Eros, no revolution is going to be successful anyway. So where most common political action is meant to stabilize and or is for ego's sake. So think about this for a second. Most political action today is for ego's sake. As you know, I'm on council. I'm getting a ton of emails on new Airbnb bylaws coming out.
Yeah.
But the political action that's happening here is for ego's needs. Here, it's for their own profit in a sense, and that's fine. That's how it works in our society.
Yeah.
But that's not political action. That's not going to change anything. I mean, if you want a different and better way of living, it's a lot more than just ego involved. The ego will actually slow it down and destroy it. What you need is a cataclysmic encounter with Eros, which would break down barriers that previously would have been thought impossible to overcome. Just like an individual in love who has barriers in their mind that they would never do is suddenly able to do them, the same thing, the same schema there can happen in politics. And what he's actually thinking about here, when this happened almost overnight, he's thinking of the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the fall of the Soviet Union, the end of apartheid in South Africa, and the peace process in Northern Ireland. If you recall, these people hated each other at every step of the way. When Boris Yeltsin removed Russia from the Soviet Union, it collapsed right away. I mean, Russia and the 13 other independent states became independent. The fall of the Berlin Wall, and suddenly the East, the entire East threat, in a sense, the Eastern threat of the Warsaw Pact, evaporated overnight. The Northern Ireland peace talks, I mean, they took a little longer, but it happened, right? And I think he holds out hope that if love were to, Eros in particular, were to overcome in the Middle East, the Israeli-Palestinian conundrum would be solved and could be solved practically overnight.
Yeah, but it wasn't love that solved the...
It's Eros. So yes, love, okay, so remember, for Han, the notion of love that we've taken in the modern world, where we separate it into agape loves, which is self-sacrificial, Eros, Philos, Stora. There's a few other ones I forget. These things for him are in a sense nonsense, because what really counts is the feeling in the body, the heart palpitating faster, the breath, the blood, the flushing of the face. All of this stuff happens. The difference is that it's different levels of intensity depending on who you're going with, who you're talking about, or what you're talking about. Political conversations can get pretty intense sometimes. But the highest level of intensity is with your significant other. But that kind of intensity directed at politics requires love. It's not intellect. I'm sure you may have heard this when you're trying to sell something, you want to appeal to people's emotions because that's what actually moves them. You appeal to their numbers or with logic and facts. It doesn't usually work. It may be necessary to help reinforce and all that kind of stuff, but the passion comes from the emotions. And if you're unwilling to actually deal with those, you're in trouble, or it's not going to be successful. Or they can be commandeered in the wrong direction towards hate instead of love. And then that's what you have in the case of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it seems. They've got a huge intensity of feeling directed angrily at each other instead of lovingly. And
Yeah, but that's by design, though.
yes, well, that's part of what the capitalist system needs. But
Yeah.
the thing that he's saying is that with an injection of Eros, it can change. It's interesting to see the spark that ticked off various things, various big things. So my understanding of what happened at the Checkpoint Charlie in 1989, at the fall of the Berlin Wall, was that there was a memo that came down but wasn't delivered for some reason, and the point was that nobody was going to shoot sorry, I'm drawing a blank here. There was something unusual about something that happened, and it was some relation to caring about the people. It was misinterpreted or something like that, and so Checkpoint Charlie was opened up. In the case of the fall of the Soviet Union, when the tanks were coming to arrest Boris Yeltsin, it turned out that the lead tank happened to be from his hometown, and they recognized each other. They were, in a sense, friends. So the lead tank that was going to arrest Boris Yeltsin decided, no, he's going to join them. And that was when the tanks circled and protected Boris Yeltsin and essentially gave him the power to take the Russia out of the Soviet Union.
Yes.
That friendship there was critical to it, and it had world-changing consequences of it. There was a story about how
Yeltsin's quite a character, though.
Yeah, I mean, nobody's perfect. I mean, he had his other problems, but the point was that at that moment, at a critical moment, it was an expression of love.
Ooh, I don't know. That's not the reading I got. Have you read Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein?
Yes. No, I'm sorry. I've read synopsis of it. But the point that I'm saying is that if it's true that the incident was that the tank commander that was supposed to go and arrest Boris Yeltsin knew him personally from their own home village, that was an act of love that changed that tank commander to disobey his orders, support his friend from his village, and therefore give him the power to separate Russia from the Soviet Union.
Yes. Okay, I suppose, yeah, in that narrow sense, yes, sure, you could call that an act of love, yeah.
Anyway, he's of the opinion that that's what one small little act of love can do. It can tip the balance in a totally different direction.
Right.
And insofar as that happens, on a massive scale, imagine a revolution that was led by Eros instead of thumos, or instead of logos. That's what he's talking about by the injection of Eros into politics. Beautiful deeds come forth.
Well, we should have elected Marianne Williamson then for president. You remember her?
Do not know her.
Oh, she was this new age kind of weirdo, but who like had crystals and stuff. But yeah, she was talking about love and very very spiritual type person on on the debate stage early on in the Democratic primaries.
I don't think this guy's into crystals.
No, but she would have been a lot closer. I mean, if you listen to her speeches, like she would have been a lot closer along the to what Han was talking about here. Maybe I'll send you a video on her or something. She was a hoot.
So when you talked about the spiritual aspect, Han doesn't seem to be very spiritual here.
Okay, it's true. But she did emphasize the power of love as well.
Yeah.
And
what did she mean by love?
Sorry?
What did she mean by love?
I don't remember, but
okay. That's crucial. But anyway, then he gives a few sections on art. He likes surrealism, by the way. So, and it was short and it was very sweet. So I just quoted it straight from the book. It goes something like this. For the surrealists, Eros is the medium of a poetic revolution in language and existence. It is exalted in the energetic source of renewal, which also feeds political action. Through its universal power, it combines the artistic, the existential, and the political. Eros manifests itself as the revolutionary yearnings for an entirely different way of loving and another kind of society. Thereby, it remains faithful to what is yet to come. And that's what he says about art. And that was a hard one to understand, but I'm not entirely sure I get it yet. We're going to talk about two other, well, one, I guess, but two aspects of another threat to love in this last section of the book. The atopic other resists classification. So again, we talked about this briefly. If you think you can put your significant other into boxes, you're sorely mistaken. And by trying to put them into these different categories, you're in fact destroying the other. So it resists classification. And as such, offers a level of resistance to deep thought because of its unknowability. Okay? Again, your love object, love is unknowable. But calculated, data-driven thought utterly lacks the resistance offered by the atopic other. Calculating, data-driven thought lacks that atopic other, the resistance of the other. Without Eros, thinking is merely repetitive and additive. So likewise, love without Eros and the spiritual lift it provides deteriorates into mere sensuality. Sensuality and work belong to the same order, according to Hahn. They're a deprived, poor substitute. They're a want for the true desire, which is Eros, or the desire of the other. They both lack spirit and desire. So furthermore, the end of theory has been posited as a good thing by some. And theory here is like all the theories we have in the world, like psychoanalytic theory, Freud's theory, all of this stuff. Google is very much in favor of getting rid of theory, because what they do is they've made, in fact, lots of money and with large quantities of data calculating, analyzing and manipulating it, looking for patterns and for correlations. But what Hahn says, this is not thinking. Okay?
Right.
Thinking requires theory. And theory abstracts from the world. Theory takes away a lot of data points, for example, links specific ones to try and make sense of the rest without the rest. That's what theory does. It facilitates thinking, making sense of the world, instead of looking for patterns and correlations. Thinking requires theory, and he goes on to say, there is no such thing as data-driven thinking. It's only calculation. Only calculation is data-driven. And here again, we have the negativity that's missing. The negativity of the incalculable is inscribed in thinking. As such, it is prior and superordinate to data. And he points out that data means things that are given already. This is like what it means in Greek or Latin or wherever it comes from. But thought is negativity because it pre-exists, in a sense, the new data, right? The theory underlying thinking is a precept, a guide, and a parameter. And it transcends the positivity of given facts and makes them suddenly appear in a new light. When you impose a theory, it may never be exactly correct, but it can make itself correct. This is important. As an example, I think I've given this in many different cases. If you have a theory that love is a gift from God, and then you feel it from somebody, it has a much more meaningful thing, but that's based on theory that not everybody accepts. But if we look at it from a different theory, say a scientific perspective, love is merely a chemical imbalance in the brain that causes obsessive behavior towards somebody, which sounds very scientific, but much less meaningful. And if you can't think about it, if it's purely data driven, you're missing out on what's really important in the feeling. Does that make sense? The
Yeah, yeah.
theory of she's the one for me, the romantic notion that I found my soulmate. While there may not be any data for that, it is a theory that is highly valuable to people.
Right, right. Yeah, you're not basing it off of a calculation, an equation that you put together, or group together enough data points to say, ah, yes, this she meets these criterion. Yeah, and if you do that, then you're thwarting
Well,
love.
yes, exactly. But and that's in a sense what data apps kind of or dating apps kind of do. So the theory underlying thinking is is what makes life actually worth living. It also makes the world understandable. It creates the world that we live in, good or bad. So this is one of the things he agrees with Foucault. Foucault is under the impression that we've created the modern world when we developed the new sciences of sociology, psychology, penology, and modern medicine, and all these things. They created the new modern soul, and they create power relations in a sense, and they mold us in a particular way. All theory does that, but it does create much more meaningfulness than just pure correlation, for good or for ill. But what he's saying is if it's infused with Eros, it's going to be probably for the good. So the second point that he wants to drive is that data-driven science without theory might get you to correlation, but never to truth in a narrative or interpretive way. So facts and truth are two different things. Facts are, in a sense, what can't really be debated or not seriously debated, like sky is blue. We can debate the hue of the blue, or if it really stays blue at night, that kind of stuff. But under certain circumstances, the facts are the facts. The truth is the interpretation of the facts, what it means for us, right? So data can give you facts, but not truth. As an example, the theory of evolution has data, but it is not data-driven. But it does help organize a lot of stuff. Causality is also a theory that has data, but could not be derived from the data. This is interesting because if you're familiar with David Hume, who challenges causality, he points out that if you see you throw a billiard ball and you see it rolling along, hit and stop as it hits another billiard ball, and the second billiard ball continues going, that's all you see. But we attribute to that a theory that says causality, the first one moved the second one, right? So David Hume was trying to show that we're creating things in our mind all the time, and it can lead us astray. What Han is saying, yes, it could lead us astray, but it's absolutely necessary, and it's necessary for meaning to be developed. We need to do this, right or wrong. It's important. So because of information's positivity, it is additive and cumulative. As positivity, information changes nothing and announces nothing. It is utterly inconsequential until you add the theory. And the theory is an extraction from earlier data points and applied to a new one. In contrast to that, to mere data, what he's looking for is insight. Insight is a negativity. It's the result of applying theory. It is exclusive, it's exquisite, and it's executive. Executive is an executive function of the brain. An insight preceded by experience is capable of shaking up the status quo in its entirety and allowing something wholly other to begin. That is, in fact, how you can actually create something new. And that is certainly not something that we want in our capitalist society, because, whoa, a shakeup? Oh, that's exactly what they don't want. They want stability. They want the constant change within their controlled parameters. But it's insight that allows for that, and that's not data-driven. Information society, the one we live in today, has no access to the wholly other, wholly meaning the full otherness of something. It completely lacks Eros. because Eros is what transforms. If you want to actually transform yourself, you need the erotic injection. You want to transform society, you need the Eros. That's what it does. That's what Eros is for him. Eros through with the other, or through and with the other, is what takes thinking into the new and into the unknown. It is Eros that generates insight from mere information. So again, information is necessary. But what he's saying is, in our society, we're much too interested in information. We have information technology. We don't have thinking technology.
Right.
We have data centers. We're losing libraries.
Well, and universities too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They're being turned into jobs training programs.
Right, which is, it's not thinking. And so far as it requires thinking, that it's positive, but it's unlikely, because thinking he's talking about is developing something new. There's very few inventors out there, and you can tweak things that are existing, make new discoveries, or increase the powers of things that exist. But new inventions are few and far between. So continuing on, it is Eros that generates insight from mere information. Here's his final quote. Thinking begins with Eros. To be able to think, one must first have been a friend, a lover. Without Eros, thinking loses all vitality and turmoil. Turmoil, this is important. Turmoil is one of those negatives that is missing, and becomes repetitive and reactive. Eros infuses thinking with desire or the atopic other. Here he's not talking about your significant other, he's talking about another idea, another way of living. We've gotten into the political realm. And that is
like socialism.
Like a new branch of socialism, because the ones we've tried.
Well, they weren't ever socialism. Those were worker states and degenerated worker states.
Okay. Fair enough. But yes, in that sense, in that case, just like socialism, right? And that ends this very short 60-page book, which we've now covered for almost 5 hours.
Wow. So you say 50-page book, you said?
I think I just misplaced it. I was looking for it. I think it's about 60 pages, 50 pages, something like that.
Wow, yes. Very, very dense.
It was very dense, yes.
All right, so what's up next?
That's a good question. I haven't decided yet. What would you like?
I'd have to think about that one.
Okay. May I suggest then a short book by Jean Baudrillard, also very dense, but even smaller than this one.
Ooh, Baudrillard.
Yes, Baudrillard.
Baudrillard.
He wrote it just on his deathbed, and it was published posthumously. And it's titled, Why Hasn't Everything Already Disappeared?
Sounds fun.
Very thin. This one is literally 70 pages. And it has pictures.
All right, perfect. Sounds good. All right, so that'll be 2 weeks from now?
Yeah, that sounds good.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for watching. We had a few viewers. There's one comment. Maybe I'll get you to address.
Sure.
From someone with Chinese characters. I can't tell. Anyway, they said the mystery of the capitalist West is no more for the Chinese. That's why no Chinese desires the West anymore. So I guess the mystery of the U.S. has been demystified. So they no longer have this fantastical view of the West and how Americans live. So now they no longer have this desire to be American or to know them.
That sounds like a very hopeful statement, and I think it could lead to a different and better world, at least an example of a different and better world. No world in a sense being perfect, but in the sense of somebody that we can look to grow from and to learn from, and perhaps even improve our own society.
All right. Well, see you next time. And yeah, thanks everybody.